Synapse. Synapse is a region where one neuron ends and starting of another neuron occurs. Hello friends, welcome to Biology Concern. I am Animesh, and in this video I am going to discuss about the synapse, the types and the transmission. This is the first part, and in the second part I am going to discuss about the transmission in chemical synapses. So let's jump into the topic. First, the synapse. So the synapse refers to the point of contact between two neurons where one neuron ends and it passes its information to the next neuron where that second neuron starts. So basically synapses are most often formed between axons and dendrons, and it consists of a presynaptic neuron, synaptic cleft and postsynaptic neurons. So always presynaptic neuron and postsynaptic neurons are there, because presynaptic neurons, it stands for the ending of one neuron, and postsynaptic neuron is refers to as the starting of the another neuron. Basically synapses are divided into two major categories. One is electrical synapse and another one is chemical synapse. So in the case of electrical synapse there is absence of synaptic cleft, and in the chemical synapse there is presence of the synaptic cleft. So in the case of electrical synapse, here presynaptic neuron and postsynaptic neuron occurs, and these two synaptic neurons or pre and postsynaptic neurons are connected by ion channels. So particularly these channels are voltage gated channels or ion channels. So basically these ion channels directly transfers the electrical signals from one neuron to the next neuron, and in this case the electrical signal passes from first neuron to the second neuron. Okay, so it is uncommon in complex animals. Transmission is very fast, as it is the electrical synapse is present or electrical transmission is present. Bidirectional transmission can possible. So from first neuron to second neuron this transmission can be possible, and from second neuron to first neuron this kind of transmission is also possible in this case. So this kind of neurons or this kind of synapses, that is the electrical synapses, can be excitatory in nature. So it is always excitatory in nature and found in hippocampus, neocortex, retina, olfactory bulb and spinal cord. So these are the places where these electrical synapses present. The chemical synapses. In case of the chemical synapses, pre and postsynaptic neurons are separated from one another. Presynaptic neurons forms a vesicle known as synaptic vesicle, and those synaptic vesicles are compacted with neurotransmitters such as acetylcholine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, etc. So these kind of neurotransmitters are compact with the synaptic vesicle, and those synaptic vesicles are fused in the membrane of presynaptic neurons with the presynaptic neurons, and they releases this neurotransmitter within the synaptic cleft. So this portion is synaptic cleft, and the neurotransmitter are released into this synaptic cleft, and postsynaptic neurons having a structure that is known as receptor. Okay, so this receptor can recognizes those particular neurotransmitters, and it converts, and those neurotransmitter actually binds with these particular receptors, and it transmits the signal inside of the neuron. So in this case of chemical synapses, first electrical synapse is converted into the chemical signal. So electrical signal is converted into the chemical signal, and again this chemical signal again converted into the electrical signal. So this kind of chemical synapses is most common in the complex animals. Transmission is slow rather than electrical synapses. This is unidirectional transmission occurs in this kind of chemical synapses. These synapses can be excitatory or inhibitory in nature according to their neurotransmitter or nature of the neurotransmitter. If the neurotransmitter is excitatory neurotransmitter, then these synapses or the signal is excitatory in nature, and if the neurotransmitter is inhibitory in nature, then the signal is the chemical synapse is inhibitory in nature. So found in muscle cells, glandular cells and sensory cells. So these are the chemical synapses. Now if we pay attention to the closer look of this particular receptor, now we can be identified, or we can be found that these receptors are of two types. One is ionotropic receptor and another is metabotropic receptor. So in this case of ionotropic receptor, these receptors are totally ligand gated receptors. That means whenever the ligand or neurotransmitter bound with this particular ion channels, then these receptors is open, and if there is absence of ligand, that means the neurotransmitter, then there is no transmission occurs, or the channels remain closed in nature. So absence of ligand, ion channels are always closed. So in the presence of the particular ligand or neurotransmitter, these channels can be opened, and these channels, when it is open, it transmits or create a passage for the sodium, potassium and calcium ions. Another kind of receptor is metabotropic receptor. So this metabotropic receptor contains neurotransmitter binding site. So specifically there is a site known as neurotransmitter binding site. So this site specifically known as neurotransmitter binding site, where the neurotransmitter binds with this particular receptor, and it creates a signal, and it provides the signal to the G protein. So G protein or G protein acts as an intermediate mediator, and those G proteins ultimately activate those receptors, and those receptors now opens, and it facilitates the transfer of the ions or passage of the ions from one side of the neuron to the another side of the neuron. So basically its activation is intermediate molecules such as G proteins or GPCRs, and particularly these receptors indirectly linked with ion channels, and in the case of ionotropic receptors, this acts as a cation channel that allow the passage of sodium, potassium and calcium ions, and these are the ligand gated ion channels. So basically the two kinds of receptors are present in the case of chemical synapses. One is ionotropic receptor and another one is metabotropic receptor. So all the chemical synapses, the postsynaptic neuron contains two major kind of receptors. So these receptors are either ionotropic or metabotropic. So in case of ionotropic, this is a ligand gated channels or ligand gated receptors present, and in case of metabotropic receptors, there is a particular protein that is known as neurotransmitter binding site that is the present in case of metabotropic receptors. So this is the first part of the synapse, where I have discussed about electrical synapse, chemical synapse, and the nature of the neurotransmitter receptors, that is ionotropic receptor and metabotropic receptor. If you like that video, please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching.